Okay, hi everyone. It's 10:05 GMT, so we're going to get started. Michael, I can see you're saying you cannot hear me. Can others hear me though?
No, I think I can now hear you.
Okay, yes, great. So hi everyone, my name is David Opoku. I am with the Open Contracting Partnership and I'm our Community and Capacity Build Manager, which means that I lead our global training and capacity building. So welcome to the call on how to map your current systems to the OCDS. For those of you who are joining a learning circle for the first time, the idea was to create a space where different members of the open contracting community can share their experiences, questions, and also create more peer learning spaces as we all work towards different things towards open contracting implementation and reform. So this is our fourth topic, and we have a lead facilitator or experienced person called Matt Marshall who will be leading us through this conversation. One thing I want to say before I pass it on to Matt is that these calls are not meant to be an instructive or instructional lecture where you have OCP telling us what is happening. It's more supposed to be a conversation around your different experiences. So either people who have already done OCDS field mapping before, people who are thinking about it, or people who have no idea about it, please share those experiences because this helps all of us understand what the challenges and experiences are, and we can move forward with that. So with that, I'll pass it on to Matt to introduce himself and get us started.
Hey everyone, my name is Matt Marshall. I work on the OCDS help desk, contracted by OCP. I work mostly directly with publishers doing various types of support. This is my first time doing a learning circle type of thing with a group of you together, so it's quite exciting for me. The way that I thought this day would go is that we'd start off with a very quick round of introductions. So David's done some very good work of just noting down who's in the call. So I'm just going to ask people to introduce themselves in the order that I have them written down, and then for people who I've missed to just speak up at the end. And then just to break the ice, I have a few sort of high-level questions to the group, and the purpose of this is just to get a little bit of discussion going about why we're all here and what the importance of mapping is. And then I've prepared a slide deck just to very quickly walk us through the what, why, and the how of mapping. And like David said, it's not meant to be a lecture. So I would encourage people to interrupt me at any time for any reason as well. And then I've got a template, which is a field level mapping template, and I've got a worked example, and we can go through a worked example together in order just to get everybody up to speed. And then I've left some time at the end of the agenda to do a bit of an open floor, so you can ask questions of the help desk or ask questions of each other, share experiences, and then we can note them down. And then afterwards, when that's all done, I'm going to share around the sort of the agenda and notes document so that people have something to refer to, which sort of already contains all the links for everything else. So just to get us all kicked off, David's already introduced himself. I'll introduce myself again. Hello, I'm Matt. I'm part of the OCDS help desk. I work mostly directly with publishers. And the next person I have written down is Mel Flanagan.
Mel Flanagan from Sydney, Australia. I'm a open contracting, open data, beneficial ownership advocate. I'm also a data designer. So we've been looking at how we can introduce open contracting, particularly the data standard, but the other sort of broader sort of open contracting sort of philosophies, I guess. So I've been really interested in the mapping of the data because we've got our state government and federal government, and we're really just trying to understand what their needs are, what's in the data standard, but also what are the other data pieces of work and what are the other data sets that they're interested in mapping back into the open contracting data standard.
Great, thank you very, very much, Mel. And apologies if I butcher anybody's name, but the next person I have written down is Ndukwe.
Okay, hello everyone. Good morning. I'm Ndukwe from Nigeria. Work for the state government, I'm a web developer, and I've been helping out procurement agencies to help them build their open contracting data standards portal.
You broke up a little bit just towards the end there, but were you saying that you're helping towards build an open data portal?
No, open contracting data standard portal.
Yes,
OCDS
okay.
portal for the state government in Nigeria.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And the next person I have written down is Alexandra.
Hi, I hope you can hear me. I'm Alexandra Stoker. I'm an open contracting, open data policy advisor in the transparency team in the UK Cabinet Office. We actually already have our central e-noticing tool, which is called Contract Finder mapped to OCDS. It's relatively simplistic, so it'd be interesting to hear some of the examples that people are using around the world to help learn some lessons. I'm here to be ears, essentially. So it would be good to hear what people are up to.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Alexandra. The next person I have is Michael.
Hello. Hi, everyone. I'm called Michael Chankuru, a data analyst. I work with the Africa Freedom Information Center. And with Africa specifically, I really do data analysis of OCDS data. And what we do is try to promote disclosure of information procurement across Africa. And our workflow normally is, before we even promote it and promote use of tools, we need to understand gaps where what is missing, what is being done correctly. That will give us an idea of what to do. And to do that, we heavily use this OCDS mapping. Actually, I use the very first template ever to do mapping in Uganda, and the result was actually the procurement portal. So we use these templates extensively. Those have been changing over the years, and I'm really interested in this training in particular to see what's new.
Great, thank you very much, Michael. And Willis.
Hi everyone. I receive warm greetings from Nairobi, Kenya. I am the director of a Pan-African Youth Empowerment organization called the Youth Cafe, and we took part in the lift competition as having interest in increasing opportunities that youngsters have in public procurement space. We have other sectors and focus areas where we work on, and specifically for open contracting, our interest is to ensure that more young people have access to opportunities within public contracting through procurement. We are based in Kenya and have presence in 22 countries in Africa. Thank you. It's my first time to join the lift webinars.
Cool. Well, this is my first time at a lift webinar as well, so you're in good company. And the next person I've written down is Mansur.
Okay, my name is Mansur Usman from the Bureau of Public Procurement, Nigeria. We currently have an open contracting portal called Nigeria's Open Contracting Portal, NOCOPO, which is in line with the OCDS data standards. We've been in contact with the OCP help desk. We're currently reviewing some of the inputs that they have made to ensure that our data fields are in line with the open contracting data standards. So I'm here to learn more and more about open contracting data standards, and then to hear about other experiences. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you very much. And next I have Satu. I might have mispronounced that, Satao.
Hello.
Hello.
My name is Sato. I come from Côte d'Ivoire. I speak French. I hope to learn. Sorry, my English is very bad.
No, Satu is I mean, your English is much better than my French, so we hear that, and thanks for joining. And also, we will, if you're having any difficulty, you can also maybe write things in French, and then we'll see if we can respond to those also directly in English. We do also have resources and other colleagues who speak French. So if you want us to follow up with you directly after this call, we can do that. So thanks for pointing that out.
Cool. Thank you very much, Satu. We'll move on to, I've written down Polycarp. Okay, just moving on. I think that was the last people we had written down to introduce ourselves, unless Hera has joined. Okay, cool. So thank you, everyone. That's given me a really good idea of what everyone's like sort of goals are for this session. So it's an open floor now, but to avoid awkward silences, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask a question, and then if somebody doesn't speak within, should we say 5 seconds or 10 seconds, then I'm just going to nominate somebody. And if you are sitting there afraid of being nominated, that's totally fine. You just have to say pass. Because I'm not going to force anybody to talk, but it's just a way of like trying to avoid everyone waiting for each other. So the first question I have for the group is, has anyone ever had experience trying to work with spreadsheets or other forms of data that say the same thing, but in 2 different ways? Mel, you're an open data advocate. Have you had experiences trying to work with 2 different data sets that try to say the same thing? Yes. Okay. So Mel,
yes. So we've been looking at the yes.
Okay. Can you elaborate a little bit for the group?
Yeah, sure. I guess the where we came from in Australia was the open data standard was introduced by a developer who happened to be and so the I guess the introduction of open contracting came from developers. It didn't come from necessarily a no one really did the sort of user experience research or what the user needs were, and the data mapping wasn't really done in it was done by a developer, and so the introduction was it was implemented, but there was just one person really working on it, and they had the support of the open contracting data services team. So when it came for us to use the data, so we used the New South Wales data, which is one of our state governments, and then we looked at using the federal government implementation of the data standard. It was interesting for us because we tried to do the mapping back and kind of really understand what the data was telling us. We found it quite difficult. And one of the reasons why was there wasn't a easy to understand data dictionary. So one of the challenges that both the state government had and the federal government had was they hadn't designed and they hadn't done the work in terms of developing a data dictionary to help people understand what their data meant.
Mm-hmm.
And what their data, the way that they described the data was very different to what was in the mapping, the way that open contracting described it.
Great, thank you very, very much. Just randomly, just to get another, you don't have to talk, that was wonderful, Mel. So you don't have to talk at extreme lengths at all. So Mel's answer was absolutely wonderful. But if anyone's sitting there afraid that they have to sort of match it, that's you don't need to. Like 1 or 2 lines is absolutely fine for the purpose of the call. So I'm just going to nominate randomly Willis, because you're next to Mel. Have you ever had any experience trying to use 2 different types of data together that say the same thing but in 2 different ways?
So I think I may not be in a good position to answer that. Perhaps if we had our technology partner here. But what I can say is that we have multiple sources through which we get the data sets for especially the 30% public procurement that is reserved for young people, women, and people living with disabilities. So in most cases, the data is the same, but are presented at different times and are availed publicly in different mechanisms. So that means that even though the data is similar, some have different variations. So, for example, for example, through the official treasury data source for open contracting opportunities that are reserved for young people, such experience may not be as good as, for example, Tender Soko, which is more of privately run and updates constantly, and we are able to get the most updated data as with respect to when the opportunities are announced and are publicly advertised. So I do not know whether this answers your question, but I'm happy to elaborate more.
That's wonderful, Willis. And not only does that answer my question, that segues very nicely into my second question, which is, why do people think that mapping is important, not just to open data and OCDS, but to transparency in general? If anyone has any strong thoughts.
I think for me, mapping is very critical because procurement takes place in locations, okay? And we have seen numerous incidences where, for example, a public official goes to a place and declares that, okay, there will be a road constructed from this point to that point, and it has been allocated, and the tender has been awarded. And then 1 year down the line or 2 years down the line, there is no work done yet. So integrating maps or a mapping exercise is very key to transport members of the public to the locations where the performance of these projects take place after they have been the contracts have been awarded. They are also important in terms of members of the public knowing where to get access to these services once they are available, so they know the distance from their locations to the service providers or the public service providers as it were. So it is very crucial. I would add that in most, especially in the context where we work, not all locations are can easily be mapped. So city centers or urban centers have more mapping opportunities as compared to rural locations where 70% of the population lives.
That's great. Thank you, Willis. Yeah, so location data is obviously quite an important one to begin mapping. When we talk about mapping, we generally talk about getting data from one format into another. So does anybody else feel moved to speak about sort of working with why mapping might be important to transparency itself and not just to open data and OCDS? Yep.
Okay. Hello. Yeah. Hello. Okay. Now, basically, there are standards, there are formats in which our data should follow. So, mapping for me is very essential. Basically, when data come from various sources, they come in different formats and different standards, and then we have to ensure that at all times they follow or keep to OCDS standards that we want, so that in the long run, everything comes out as we want it to be. So it's very necessary for us to actually do those appropriate mappings. So as long as we are following OCDS standards, we also ensure that whatever data is coming from, wherever source it's coming from, we ensure that find ways to map them appropriately with OCDS formats or standard.
Thank you very much. Yes, yeah, I would just like to add to that before moving us on that mapping is important to transparency, because even if you produce data and it's available to everybody, but nobody can understand it, then it's not being transparent. It's just hiding within a different form of obfuscation. So my personal take is that mapping is important because it means that you're doing the work to make sure that you're putting it in a way that people are going to be able to understand it. And as it relates to OCDS, we obviously think OCDS is one of the best ways in order to sort of produce information, because of what it can capture, and the way that it captures it makes it possible to build useful things out of that data. And so transparency isn't just the production of information. Transparency is the engagement with information as well, and doing the work to make sure that people can engage. So that's why that's my take on why mapping is important to not just open data and OCDS and data standards, but to transparency itself. Before
Matt,
we move on,
if I can add something also around that. This is David, and another thing that we've also seen as a byproduct of doing the mapping exercise is, even internally, it gives you a better understanding of the different systems and where data sits and how it all comes together for whatever purpose. So that becomes an internal byproduct of that clarity, but also it helps you identify areas where you should be capturing data that you weren't paying attention of. So that's another byproduct that we've seen in terms of doing that mapping exercise.
Wonderful, thank you, David. And just there was a message from Mel when I asked if somebody said, "Will you move to speak?" I think Mel just said yes. Mel, are you still moved to speak? No, that's fine. So the next part that I want to walk through is I've produced a very short slide deck, which I would like to take people through. I believe that I can share my screen here, but I think David needs to make me a presenter to start sharing my screen.
Yeah, give me a moment. I'll do. Matt, you should be a presenter now.
Yep, I think I'm sharing my screen now, so people should be able to see a slide with just the words Learning Circle number 4 on it. Some audio confirmation of that, because I'm not viewing the
yes, I can.
GoToMeeting. Good, thank you very much. Great. So this slide deck, it looks like a formal presentation because that's just how all slide decks tend to look, but it's really not. This is just something for us to structure a conversation around. And I can't see anyone's messages in chat, so you are encouraged to, if you have a question, just to unmute yourself and jump straight in there, and please feel free. I'm very used to being interrupted living in my part of the world. Just to put mapping in context, we have a 7-step vision of what OCDS looks like in practice, and that looks more like a loop in some places than a straightforward staircase. So we start with the design phase, where you start designing your implementation and what your sort of larger project will look like. But when you reach mapping, that's when you take a like sort of a step back to reflect on what your current situation is, and what technical systems do you have, what legal concepts do you have, and start mapping those to OCDS. So is that a duplicate slide? Yeah. So mapping is ultimately about understanding all these different sort of pieces of what makes up an implementation together, and finding alignment between what people are wanting from the data, what data you have in your system, and how to get it out in a particular format. And that covers both things like policy. So you might have a law in your context that states that any procurement over, should we pick a number, so 1,000 Great British pounds, has to go through a particular type of procurement process, or has to be published in a particular way, and then or has to go through certain stages. So it's mapping those policy concepts onto OCDS. And then chances are you will have some systems in place in order to enable that. And when we say systems, it's very easy to be a bit technocentric and think, oh, I don't have this fully fledged sort of database e-procurement system. A system could be a way that you do things, and it could be a filing system that we need to take into account in order to get that paper information mapped onto a database in order to do some digital work later. And then if you have got a technical system, or even if you're using paper forms, chances are that they have fields which describe the information that is supposed to be released. So the link between policy and fields is that you will probably have a policy that mandates the release of particular types of information, and then that those types of information are encapsulated within fields. And then you will have a localization layer to that as well. So you'll be using different terminology depending on where you are in the world and what sort of both trade agreements that you guys have and procurement processes that you guys have, and which models and frameworks that you're using to do that. Are there any sort of burning questions before we move on? Cool. I'm going to presume that was a comfortable silence rather than an awkward one, and just move on. So concept mapping is the first thing that you do. The idea is how your regulations and laws within your local sort of context map onto the procurement concepts within OCDS. So OCDS is designed to be an international standard, and it's designed to and the way that it does that is that it abstracts a little bit and produces some generic terms for what people might call different things in their context. So my question for participants in this call, and I'm just looking for like one answer, so somebody just shout one out. So when a contract is like sort of released for people to be able to bid on it in your context, what do you guys call that?
Tender.
Tender. So this is what we call it in OCDS as well. However, I do work with Scotland quite closely, and they call it a contract notice, because you are notifying people about the contract. Whereas in OCDS, we call a contract notice a notice about a contract being signed. So this is just to highlight the importance of mapping concepts over to the data standard as well, because if we hadn't had that conversation with Scotland, then they would have been producing data that was literally back to front. So thank you very much for shouting that out, whoever did that. And one of the most important ways to map concepts, and this is going a little bit into mapping fields, but I think it is quite pertinent now, is the idea of a code list. So in most procurement sort of terminology, there's like sort of a restricted set of terms, and this might be the type of goods that are being procured, or this might be the type of tender that you have. So OCDS, the data standard, defines a set of terms. So you can see here that this is the code that you would write in your data, and then this is the description of that code and its semantic meaning. So for example, in the UK, if we have a framework agreement and you wanted to make it, which is when suppliers are awarded a place on a framework, and it might be called off from. So there might be a procurement that is limited to those suppliers who are on that framework. And there are many reasons to do this, but you might then want to say, okay, that is a limited or a selective procurement process, as opposed to an open one, or occasionally there might be a direct procurement process. So it's mapping those concepts that you have onto like sort of the language used in OCDS. And I've just used the example of a code list to drive that home. Does anyone have any thoughts?
Matt?
Yes.
Yeah, Matt, just a question. So when you talk about a framework, you're talking about what some people might call a panel or a list?
Yeah, I don't know what...
is the limited something? Sorry, go
on. Sorry, you broke up a little bit there, so I'm not sure if I missed something.
Well, in Uganda here,
I guess my question is
So shall we hear from Mel first, and then we'll move over to Uganda?
Yeah, I guess my question is limited in your mind what we, like some places called a panel, like they have a panel of approved service providers, or
that might
the panel and category.
Yeah, I guess that might be. So I'm not familiar with the term panel, but this is exactly what this mapping process is. Is we end up discussing what the concept is and what the appropriate like sort of term to use for it in OCDS is. So if a panel consists of a group of pre-approved suppliers for a particular type of service, and you only advertise the opportunity to those suppliers, then you might call it a limited or a selective procurement in OCDS. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Cool. And Uganda, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I said there are two concepts in play here. There is actually the pre-qualified list where it will be selective since it's available to a limited set of people. But then when you are speaking of a framework, I would imagine what you are referring to, or how I understood it, is that, ideally a contract is given to one provider. It's a one-to-one kind of relationship. But there are situations whereby a contract is won by 3 or 4 providers. And these providers, for example, let's say the supply of mineral water across the entire year. So then there are sub-contracts given to these 3 people who have won at different times through the year, but all still under one contract. So that's what we would consider a framework. Now, I don't know, normally it could fall either way. It could have been through open bidding, it could have been through selective.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so rather than getting...
So, and actually, those are some of the gray areas. Yeah, there's some of the gray areas we face, especially when we are dealing with this mapping. But we have very strange methods of procurement that you don't necessarily categorize them in one group or the other per se. Yeah,
so that could be a strange method of of procurement. The point that we're trying to make, we used frameworks as a particularly contentious example because there are lots of different ways to describe it, but ultimately what OCDS cares about is that it is a selective or a limited type of framework. So what the conversation we've just had now is a mapping conversation, and that's the point I'm trying to drive home. Is we can worry about frameworks themselves, you know, at a later date during implementation or a limited selective frameworks, but the concepts behind them map to things that have been built into OCDS, and this is something that's important to do, is to have these conversations with the OCDS help desk team, with other publishers, and internally amongst yourselves and your own understanding of procurement, and to develop this like sort of concept map in order to support your publication. Is everyone happy if I push on to system mapping, or do we want to spend a little bit more time on this? I'm going to take comfortable silence as consent to continue, which is not a good model for the rest of life, but is for remote calls. So system mapping involves your technical systems and identifies where and how contracting data from each stage is stored. So I'm not sure to what extent people have engaged with the other types of engagements that we've had with you to describe the contracting process from the OCDS perspective, but OCDS breaks procurement down into 5 stages. We presume there has been at least some planning, and then it goes out to tender, which what we call initiation, and a award is made to a supplier, and then later a contract is signed, and after that the contract is implemented. So whether that could be simply delivering office equipment, and that is the implementation, or it could be as complex as an infrastructure project. So the idea behind this is we need to understand where information about each stage of the procurement process is stored within our systems. So hopefully there would be like sort of digital systems in order to be able to point to. If there aren't, then that creates a mandate to develop some. And so I've just used an example from the Philippines here. So we knew that they have a system called PhilJeps, and then it contains information about the tender and award stages of the procurement process. So this was the system that we identified that would be sort of an easy win if we got OCDS production out of that, and then we could start wiring in all of the other information as well. So not only sort of data, but we might be thinking about documents and identifiers. So identifiers are really important to OCDS because they can identify not only an individual procurement process, but an individual supplier, an individual buyer, an individual document at a particular point in the procurement process, and whether there are common classifications for the items being procured. So you might end up in a situation, or you might see that there is a situation that you have several systems that you need to link together in order to produce a mapping. So you might have an e-procurement portal which covers the tender and award stage, but the actual contracts might be stored in the finance system. And then there might be like a paper filing system which has records of implementation, for example, if invoices are signed or ticked off upon delivery. So the way that we support you in mapping systems is that we have what we call a technical assessment template, and it is a really, really solid template, but it's not intimidating at all. It's just a document. So I've linked to it in these slides, and you'll receive a copy of the slides after the call. But what you would do when you engage with system mapping is you take this technical assessment template, and it walks you through the questions of what are our current systems, which systems hold data on different stages of the procurement process, and what features of the data do these systems have. So do they have identifiers? Do they have this type of information that we maybe have a demand for? And it basically, at the end of this system mapping process, you'll have a document that you can like sort of sit and reflect upon. And then if you share it with the OCDS help desk as well, we can like sort of consult with you in order to determine what the best route forward for you will be. Does anyone have any questions about system mapping? Nope.
Yes, sorry, please. I just have a little question.
Yep.
Can I come in?
Yes, of course you can.
Okay. My name is Mansur. Is it possible to have an e-procurement system and also have an open contracting portal? That is probably an e-procurement system that works from all the modules, from advertisement till the last module, and then you use the open contracting portal as the portal in which you publish data, the portal in which you have your procurement plans and records on.
Yes, in fact, I'm. You would have to determine what your sort of use case needs are, but I'm a big fan of that approach. So a theoretical approach would be that you have an e-procurement system which generates the OCDS data, and then you have an open contracting portal which can consume it, and then you just use that as the public facing place which releases the data. So the great thing about releasing open data is that it becomes almost like this sort of natural resource, this digital resource that you are, think of like a friendly oil spill, which is a horrible metaphor to think about, but it's the way that I like to think about it. And that if you produce this information, you can then harvest it and then process it and display it anywhere you want. So that could be within an e-procurement system, that could be within an internal government system if you want to reflect upon it, and or that could be within a dedicated open contracting portal. So you might have one system producing the information and another system being used to display and release the information to the public. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much. Because I'm just saying that because in Nigeria we're trying to come up with an e-procurement system, and we're at the point of getting up the standard bidding documents and all, and but we already have an open contracting portal, and we want the government and citizens to continue to use the open contracting portal. But since both of them are going to be under the open contracting data standard, so the integration will be easy, and then we could publish our procurement information on the open contracting, on the existing open contracting portal.
Yeah. Great. That sounds really, really solid. Yeah. So the sort of the tagline that I usually give to people when they ask that sort of question is that you might have a system at the minute, but with like sort of open contracting and open data, it becomes an ecosystem. So you can pass that information around and display it and process it however you want. And then this a dedicated open contracting portal is a really good way to do that. And I personally would like to see more examples of that.
Thank you very much. We'll be in contact with the OCDS help desk on that.
Great.
And Matt, if I can add anything over here, I'm glad to. Mansur, just want to confirm this is with at the federal level, right? This is with the BPP that you're talking about in terms of the system, the EGP system you're trying to implement.
Yes, this is at the federal level. It's an open contract. It's e-government procurement system. It's a Nigeria's e-government procurement system. Actually, it's starting mainly from the federal, but in collaboration with the World Bank, we are also going to later on bring on board the state governments. That's the sub-regional government on the same portal instead of having different e-procurement system. The target is to have one e-procurement system for the country at large.
Great. Okay. Thank you. So that's super helpful, and we'll ask the help desk love to follow up. And for others, to also add to your question, in addition to what other great things that Matt has said, the way you can think about the open contracting portal is a way to show everything that is happening from the planning stage all the way to the implementation stage in relation to public procurement. Now, some of those stages may be happening on the EGP system. other parts also may be happening on other systems. For instance, sometimes in terms of budgets and finances, the Integrated Financial Management Information System, IFMIS, is also another part that has data. Sometimes it can also be treasury systems. What your open contracting portal should be doing is should allow you to capture all the information from those different systems into one place that makes it easy for the public to understand, see that data, and use that for whatever purposes. So an EGP system is one part of it. It may not have all the data. OCDS is helping you pull all that together onto some kind of central, easy to access portal that then the public can use and engage with.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great way to think of it as well. That OCDS is kind of like the glue that holds everything together, and it can be used to produce something that provides an all-encompassing view. But how that's powered is, in terms of all the various different systems, is entirely up to your context. Cool. Does anyone have any questions about the technical assessment template itself before we move on? Just as a warning, like to answer them, I will just open the technical assessment template and demonstrate that it's just an unintimidating document. Nope. Great. So the next stage is the field level mapping, which we'll talk about in detail in a few minutes, I guess. But OCDS implementation is most effective when you meet a range of different user needs. So you, through your sort of project, your OCDS project, you will have a set of needs that you need to address. So you might be trying to support civil society, or you might be trying to address overspending or other forms of inefficiencies or potentially even corruption. So you will have curated a set of needs, and then you will have determined what bits of OCDS will be useful for you in addressing those needs. And doing the mapping might highlight gaps in data collection as well as data publication. So you might determine that, in order to support understanding how long contracts take to implement when they're made with particular suppliers, I need to get information about the dates that a contract was signed versus the date that it finished being implemented. So I need to have implementation information in a particular way, like sort of project milestones, etc., etc. And then when doing those mapping, you will understand, okay, these are what those fields are in OCDS. And then you'll try to map backwards, and then you'll go like, we actually don't collect that information in a particular way. This is a gap in data collection, which means that we can't address that need yet. And that might create mandate for you to sort of begin systematizing that or begin collecting that information in a way that you can sort of wire it in to your OCDS. And so the way that we do this is through field level mapping, and this can highlight the gaps in data collection as well as gaps in OCDS itself. So OCDS, I mentioned before, is it tries to cover as many bases as possible, but the result of that is that we have to abstract in some cases, and we saw that with the terminology around tender versus the terminology like the one in Scotland, which is the contract notice. But there might be cases where OCDS hasn't covered your data need, but you don't want to produce a separate data set for it, and you want to wire that information into your OCDS. So you can release that information within the data set as an additional field, or you can develop what's called an OCDS extension to cover all of the data collected. And the way that the direction that we push people in is to do an OCDS extension, because it means that you can declare what you're collecting, and you can also make that extension available to other publishers. So if there was a particular type of information that was relevant to, say, East African procurement, then you might want to develop an extension that covers those fields and then make it available to all sort of implementers and data sets within that context. And the way so what this kind of looks like is you take the fields within your database. This is just an example of what a database field or front end to a database field might look like, and then those fields within OCDS. So you might have your sort of your company name and your first name and your last name. That would map to the party's information within OCDS. And then on this image here, we have the ID, title, and description of the tender. That might be mapped to a particular field or a particular table within your database. And the way that we support you doing this is we provide a field level mapping template to support it. So obviously all types of mapping are important to producing good data that you can use, but field level mapping is very close to what your final product will look like. So it makes it super important to do it as well as we can the first time around. And it's not that we can't fix things if they're not. If we made a mistake or if we didn't think of something, but it's much more effective to, there's like an old British term called measure twice, cut once. So we make sure that we're doing the right thing definitely before we have to go back and change it later afterwards. So the field level mapping template is designed to support you in this, and it looks really intimidating. There's lots of different colors, lots of columns and drop downs, but actually as soon as you spend more than 30 seconds with it, you'll understand that it's a very good way in order to like sort of produce an artifact which represents mapping from your system. So my intent at this point was to basically walk us through an example of the field level mapping, and then and like sort of open up the floor to everyone to finish up the call. But does anybody have any questions at this point about field level mapping in general? I'm going to take silence as a good thing. So yeah, you can peer behind the curtain here in terms of the field level mapping. So we have an example field level mapping template that I set up ahead of this call. We do also have explicit guidance on how to use it. So if, for example, I explain something here and you go, okay, I understand that, and then you sort of go away for 4 days and then come back to do this and you go, oh no, what did Matt say? We have got guidance, and you can just get in touch with the help desk as well. And we'll also be sending around all of these resources to all the participants in the call afterwards. So there's a color code for the columns.
Hi, Matt.
Hello.
Quick, could you zoom in a little bit more?
Yep, that is no problem. Does that help?
Yes, it helps a lot. Thank you.
Great. So the color coding is used throughout the mapping template. So you don't touch the gray or the white, and you don't touch the purple, but you enter data into the yellow fields, and then you can look up things in the green fields. So yellow and green are what you'll be concerned about. And then when the text is in red, that is a minimal required field for OCDS. And then the best way to describe this is actually to show it. So we go into the first tab, which is our systems. So I live in Newcastle upon Tyne in the north of England, and so I've invented a system called Newcastle Buys, which is run internally by the council. But I've decided that they're doing another system called Newcastle Contracts. So this is it would call that NCL Contracts, and the system is called Newcastle Contracts. And it's being run by let's just make up a Newcastle Development Collective. We'll skip the documentation, and then the agent and unity responsible is the local city council. So the city councils in the UK are a local government, and then true to the name, it doesn't have any planning information. It doesn't have any tender information. It doesn't have any information about the award, but it does have information about the contract, and then it's the monitoring system as well. So we'll say that it is, it's got financial monitoring and will say it has got. This is a dream system, by the way, but it's very rare that you'll have everything here. And the revision history. So OCDS has a concept of change history, which it uses to describe how a contract changes throughout its life cycle. And I'm going to say that it doesn't have any change history. It just has, we'll say partial, because it needs to monitor changes of the physical implementation, and it needs to monitor payments to the financial, but it doesn't have anything in addition to that. But it does have the documents available. And it has no existing APIs or data publication. It's just an internal system that's used by the Newcastle City Council. So then we go and describe some fields. So
sorry, before you go on, sorry to interrupt. Could you clarify what you mean by document available?
So documents available would be the physical documents or electronic versions of the physical documents that represent those that contracting process. So, for example, in a, like, say this is a contract monitoring system, they might scan physical signed contracts and store them in a database or in a system with identifiers, so that they can have PDFs or Word document copies of the contracts. And I'm going to say that they have those available. And the implications for OCDS is that that means we can link to those documents potentially within our OCDS data. Does that answer your question, David? Sorry.
Yes, it does.
That's actually just.
I also have a question. For best practice purposes, is it advisable to use, for example, if you're doing pay level mapping on 2 or 3, yes, what would be the best approach? One template per system, or do all of them simultaneously on the same document?
Ultimately, it's whatever makes it easier for you. I would recommend trying to use one template for everything, because as you see here, we have a tab that lists all of the systems out. And that means that you don't need to look at several documents to get one per system. So I would try my best to have all of the systems that you're trying to map listed within one document.
All right, thank you.
Cool. Are there any more questions? Or would anybody like me to go over anything again? Great. So the next thing that we do in field level mapping is try to understand the fields. So these are for technical people, these are just your database fields. For non-technical people, this would be the type of thing that you would do alongside people who managed the technical side of this system. So you might be familiar with the interface, which says things like title or first name. However, what we're looking for is the database system and the tables and fields that it has within it. So this is something that you generally would give to do alongside a technical person as well. So we're just going to do an example for NCL contracts. And it has a table it has a contract table, and it has a contract title, which is which will just be the name of the contract, and then it has an example for that would be a contract XYZ roads for the west of the city, and the description would be a free text title of the procurement. So that's a description of that database field, and that is optional, but it would be useful to see an example of what it is, just so that the help desk and yourselves know what type of data you're working with. And then if you understand the data type, So for non-technical people, text is usually called a string, and then other types of data include numeric data and enumerated data. So if this was a number, we would maybe say it's an integer or a date. So we'll go, it's a string, and then it is, we note that it's free text entry, but you required field. And then we'll do one more, and we'll say NCL contracts, and it's in the contracts table, and we're going to say that this field is date signed. And then an example would be the date of the time. So in Britain, we use the date format of day, month, year. So we'll say today it's the 16th of the 12th, 2019. And then the description, date contract was signed. And the data type, as you might have guessed, is a date. So within a database, chances are this wouldn't look like this. It would actually probably look like this. I just wanted to highlight that to you, that that's something to consider while mapping, is you should double check what dates, what format your dates are in, as an important point. And then we'll just say auto generated. Does anybody have any questions about this? So this is just the process of listing these the data within these systems, and this would just be one giant list. So you would maybe go through one system and do the Newcastle buys system, and then you could do the Newcastle contract system underneath it, and you wouldn't need another tab, and you wouldn't need another spreadsheet for it. Are there any questions before I proceed?
I have a question.
Yes.
That column for section / table, you know.
Yes.
Originally, this field level mapping template would not could be used by pretty much anybody, even when you are non-technical. Now, if you called it, and it was originally, I think it was just called section. Now, if you call it / table, it would then mean that somebody would have to, let's say, have prior knowledge of prior knowledge of the design, basically. I don't know that makes sense, because you cannot ascertain that there is a table called contracts if you are mapping a system you've never had relationship with. That is why originally we looked at it as sections of procurement. For example, NCL buys, you would say planning. Which planning fields do they have? You can see as per, let's say, OCDS, because what we are doing with the field level mapping is map it against the OCDS standards. In that way, then you'll be able to identify which OCDS fields are available against the particular system you are mapping. But now, if you assume there are tables, then you may not necessarily know if NCL contracts has a table called contracts, unless you're sitting with a developer of the system. Is that not the case?
Yeah, so I guess you could use it to map the sections of the procurement process, but because field level mapping exists to transform, or to support you transforming digital data from how you have it now to how you want it to look like in OCDS, we presume that there is at least some engagement with from the technical side as well. So presuming I'm sitting in Newcastle City Council and I'm a project manager and I'm doing this mapping, I would want to be sitting with somebody who works on NCL contracts or et cetera, in order to understand what the data looks like inside. Because that's going to be required. You could do it in terms of sections of the procurement, and that would be a healthy thing to do. But in terms of, this is going to be if you contract out, or if you're going to build a module within an e-procurement system, or if you're going to, you would want to give this to somebody and say, like, hey, this is what the database looks like now. I want you to map these fields over. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. Cool. Are there any other questions? Great. Cool. So you'll notice that there are some purple fields off to the side, and you'll notice that the purple, remember, was do not edit. So these are mapped, and the ones that we've just created are not mapped yet. And the reason for that is that we haven't mapped them in the other section of the spreadsheet. So we know that NCL contracts, because we've listed it as having information on a contract, it pertains to the contract section. So we go across here. On the bottom, there is a tab for contract, and then so what we know, we want to know what this is. So now we're in OCDS. We're not thinking about NCL contracts on this side. We know that we have the title of the contract, and then so we can go down here to the drop down, and we go, okay, we have contracts title, and then we know that contracts date signed. We have contracts date signed, and then what it does is the template will automatically pull through the example that you wrote in order to support you understanding what this data will look like from an OCDS perspective. And then if we go back to the fields tab, we'll notice that those are now filled in, and then we actually have the mapping to OCDS. And this is pretty much all that is required of you when doing the mapping. If you're working with an extension, there is a little bit extra to do, but as an introduction, this big scary looking template, it's literally just you writing down what information you have and how you structure it, and then flipping over to an OCDS perspective, and then mapping it over, and then having a look at how those, and making sure that all of these are ticked off as a yes, and then conversely making sure that all of the ones that are in red at the very least have been have a mapping next to them. Does anybody have any questions before we leave this exercise and move to the open floor? Great. So that actually segues very nicely into the next. I envisioned that we'd have maybe 5 minutes of just an open floor. So if anybody had any particularly strong feelings about a mapping question that they haven't talked about yet, or if there's something that you'd like me to go back over, I'm happy to do that. But the floor is yours.
Well, if I could say one or two things with the mapping, is the section where you identify the type of data, that is date, string, number.
Yep.
Now, the thing with OCDS also is that it's big on data quality. Now,
yes,
if there's a way, for example, we found challenges that you map and a date, a field that's supposed to be date, for example, contract award date, is actually a string in the system. Naturally, you'd expect it to be a date. Now, if there were features that could be added in this template to kind of red flag misaligned data types, as per it would be really nice, so that at least it helps in reporting. When you're reporting back to the system developers or the people behind, and you say, okay, it's good, you are providing dates, but there are strings, and it makes it very hard for calculations of certain things going down the road. That would be nice.
Oh, that would be incredibly nice. So I don't actually know if that. Let's try that now. So I've just changed the date signed to a string, and then we're going to go over to contract. And it hasn't red flagged it at all, but you're right. That would be a wonderful feature to have in the template of just red flagging. There needs to be an extra data processing step. That's really good. I'm going to write that down, and I'm going to put that to the help desk to try and develop that feature.
Cool.
Anyone for any more? Is there anything that I've not explained very well? So is anybody sitting there just going, oh, this looks really good and important in theory, but Matt's not a very good teacher. So do you want me to go back over anything?
I doubt you're a poor teacher, Matt, but also for others who want to also share experiences. So this is not necessarily only for people who are experts at this, but also people who are either thinking or about exploring this. If you want to ask questions, areas of clarification, or even share your experience from what you've already done, we value that a lot.
Yeah, if there's any horror stories that people have had when trying to do their own mapping, or have heard people do mapping and have horror stories that have been shared with them, that would be a really nice way to end. So any lessons learned from doing implementations through mapping?
Well, I wouldn't call mine a horror story, but I remember the previous mapping template at least there was a tab that would actually spit out the JSON, automatically produce the JSON based on the information you put, and it was extremely buggy. I don't know, I looking from the screen, I no longer seem to see that tab, but it was a particularly unique tab because it would get all this information just like you're showing now, and then kind of create an OCDS JSON with the blanks for the areas you didn't fill, and then pre-fill for the areas you did. So you'd have an idea of how your data actually looks like on the OCDS standard. But it seemed not to have hinted or mentioned upon it. Was it removed? It was really problematic.
Yeah, I think it might have been removed. So I only joined the team last year, and I think it sounds like that this was before my time. But I do think it was removed by the looks of it. And it sounds like it was probably a good thing that it was removed.
It was really problematic.
Any more interesting stories about mapping from anyone? Great. So from me, I'll get a list of emails of all of you guys from David, and then I'll make sure to send you around all the resources, including the notes document that we have, as well as the links to the slides and the template and the example that we went through. And then I'm not sure how Lift Learning Circles usually finish. So I hope David's okay with me passing back over to him to finish the call.
Yes, I am. Thank you so much, Matt. And thank you for everyone. We'll encourage you to think of this more as participatory and for you. We do have other spaces for webinar-like sessions. We want to hear from you. We want to hear where your mind and your experiences are when it comes to the specific topic. So we'll encourage you to share more on future conversations if you can. Going forward, as Matt mentioned, we will share the resources. Also, if you have any questions that pop up after this call ends, please feel free to send that to the help desk at data, that is DATA, at open-contracting.org, and the team will be more than excited to follow up with you on specific requests. Mel, I see you are unmuted. I don't know if that means you do want to ask a question before we wrap up.
I do have a question.
Please go for it.
I just wanted to know, do you have a how-to? Yeah, so this has been very useful for me, definitely. Do you have a how-to data mapping as a resource, like a little video or some sort of like step-by-step? Have you created that yet?
Great question. So Mel's question, for people who couldn't hear because she was breaking up a little bit, was, do we have a resource, whether it's a guide or a video, that walks you through how to do this field level mapping? We actually have started work on that. We have the script for a video that we're working on, and our plan is also to create those learning videos that are bite-sized that can walk you through that, and also a documentation that you can follow. Matt, correct me if the documentation is already available to share.
I don't know if it is. We do have a guide on how to use the template, but I don't think that matches what the description of the documentation that you said were. It's important to note as well that there is never going to be a universal process for doing mapping. It'll look different depending on what type of organization you're in, what your government departments look like, and the team that you've got around you. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. So for us as OCP, we are trying to find ways that we can make it easier for our different members of the community to access the resources they want to get what they're doing. And one of the things is trying to create mini tutorials, just like what Matt has done, that give you a sense of the resource and how you can get started, understanding just the general features, and you can get started. So Mel, that's one of the things that we're working on, and we hope early next year we can have that available as a resource on our YouTube channel. But these are the things that we want to hear from the community, so that it's also lights a fire under our feet and we can get them out quicker. Thank you. Any other questions from anyone? Okay, if not, with that, thank you everyone for joining, and we will let you know about other learning circles. And thank you also, Matt, for hosting this and guiding us through. Have a wonderful rest of the day and enjoy the start of the week.
Bye everyone, thank you for having me. It was very nice to meet you all.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.